Hi, everyone, and welcome to year 5 of the Trees Around the Globe student research campaign. Today, I'm going to conduct a short interview with a researcher at Boise State University and the lead author of a recent paper related to the NASA Globe Trees program. The paper is in the Environmental Research Letters, a special focus on public participation in environmental science. And the paper is called The Potential of Citizen Science Data to Complement Satellite and Airborne LiDAR Tree Height Measurements, Lessons from the GLOBE Program. Okay, so today we have a special guest with us. So can you introduce yourself, where you are, and what are some of your research interests?
Great, thanks. I'm Josh Enterkine. I'm here in Boise, Idaho at Boise State University, and my research interests are in a lot of snow science and ecology and semi-arid ecosystems, and using remote sensing techniques like airborne laser scanning and space-based systems like ISAT-2 and other satellites, as well as drones and terrestrial-based laser scanners and other fun stuff like that.
Sure. So what are some of the methods that you use personally when you need to get started on research?
Great question. There's no one set of methods that I use for everything, and everything ends up being special and different. But typically, it's either like a data-driven kind of project, like we have some data and we want to see what the data says, or we have a question we're trying to answer and then we need to go collect the data. So for getting started, it kind of starts with getting a good grasp of kind of where on that spectrum it falls, and figuring out what else we might need to compare with data that we have or to answer the question that we have, and who might collaborate or be a good resource.
Great, great. So when you start this research and you get the idea of what you want to research and the materials you collect, and when you start collecting the data, how do you organize that research? How do you know basically in what order you need to do things?
Yeah, so organizing the research, of course, is different for each project. And often it depends on how many collaborators, because often we collaborate with other universities or research groups or schools or institutions. And people might have different data at different times that we discuss, and then we kind of bring together the products or the takeaway points. But for projects that I do largely with close collaborators here at Boise State, we usually have kind of basically a folder structure where we all kind of share our data, whether it's on a computer or online, and then collaborate on documents, and it's usually pretty organic.
That's great, because when you say collaborators with your research, that can translate, seamlessly to our Trees Around the Globe student research campaign and the students working with other students in other globe countries. So they can collaborate with these students, taking the same type of data, but potentially in different locations from around the world, and then doing comparisons between the two. And you're absolutely correct. The researchers work at different paces. They take data at different times. So it's a matter of, that organization really has to fit, within the construct of how each person or group, collaborator or student does their own research. So that's great to hear.
Exactly.
All right. So when after you start taking the data, you organize your research, you do all these things, with your research, once you have that data, what are some of the methods or steps you use to draw conclusions, whether or not, whatever your hypothesis or hypotheses may have been, how do you use that data that you've collected, to potentially draw conclusions to your research?
Usually it depends on what the data is, or what we're hoping to get out of it, in terms of, is this something we're presenting, or is this kind of an intermediate step for a larger project, or if we're working on researching methods, did our methods work? Whether or not we'd get conclusions from the data from itself. Oftentimes, it's a lot of visual based, because I'm a visual learner, so lots of drawing kind of on scratch paper or whiteboard with collaborators or just people that I talk to, and then working from there to make some figures and then explain the figures to people, and that kind of helps develop the story and get questions, feedback for the data, and ultimately some conclusions.
Yeah, I like that, how you were talking about drawing conclusions from that data isn't the same process for everyone. So like you said, it all depends upon what the data is, where it's coming from, and who's taking these observations. So great. All right, one more final question
Sure.
For this interview is, in your research that you do you find any aspects of it easy? Any aspects that are extremely difficult? What is your favorite thing to do when you're doing research, basically?
That's a good question. Again, it depends on the data, but I think in general, I enjoy collaborating with people more, and sometimes I really enjoy the processing more, just kind of cleaning up the data, making a good looking product, without having to think too hard about it. So the thinking about it and the drawing conclusions is kind of probably the hard part for me. But it all depends, and it's all a journey every time.
Yep, excellent. And I just want to jump back real quickly to the last question. You mentioned about, you're a visual learner, and I think a lot of us are. And I think that's such a great idea that, yes, we have all this technology. We have, computers and, cell phones and tablets and everything. But to me too, there's nothing better than just writing something down on a piece of paper or, in your notebook or something to really, hammer that home, what you actually have to do with your research. I'm the same way. I write things down. I draw sketches. I do doodles, to figure out exactly, how I'm going to do something. So, it's great. So, so Josh, so anything else that you'd like to add to this before we finish the interview?
Nothing particular, other than don't worry about exact steps or whether you think it's going great, as long as it's engaging and you're enjoying it and doing science. It's great.
Awesome. Yep. That's a great way to end it. So thank you so much, Josh, for this interview. And, I'm sure all the students, teachers, and participants for year 5 of the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign will find this invaluable. So thank you so much.